Wife discovers husband's affair with Nanny. She makes them suffer the consequences. Hi everyone, welcome to Mr. Peter Stories. I hope you're all doing well. I noticed that the response to the last video was a bit low. If I'm making any mistakes or if the stories aren't meeting your expectations, please share your feedback. I really value it. If you're enjoying my stories, comment yes below. Also, don't forget to introduce yourself by sharing your name and city in the comments so we can all get to know each other better as part of our story family. All right, let's dive into today's story. The pristine halls of Seattle Grace Hospital echoed with the sharp click of Zora Sterling Amador's Louboutin heels as she strode purposefully toward the neurosurgery wing. At 38, she commanded the kind of presence that turned heads and demanded respect. Her elegantly coiffed locks swept into a professional updo, her white coat tailored to perfection over a designer dress that cost more than most people's monthly salary. But Zora had earned every thread of that outfit, just as she'd earned her position as one of the youngest department heads in the hospital's prestigious history. The morning light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows caught the massive diamond on her left hand, sending prismatic rainbows dancing across the sterile walls. The ring was vintage Harry Winston, Vermont's proposal piece, selected with the same meticulous attention to detail that had made him a tech industry titan. 7 years of marriage, and sometimes Zora still caught herself admiring it, remembering the night he'd gotten down on one knee at the top of the Space Needle. The entire restaurant secretly cleared out for their private moment. Dr. Sterling Amador. A resident hurried to catch up with her, clutching a tablet. The results from the experimental neural pathway trial just came in. They're revolutionary. Zora allowed herself a small smile. Of course they were. She'd spent the last 3 years developing a groundbreaking technique for repairing damaged neural pathways in trauma patients. It was the kind of work that changed lives, saved lives, and reminded her daily why she'd fought so hard to reach this position, and fight she had. As one of only 3 black women heading major departments in the top hospitals across the Pacific Northwest, Zora had faced every obstacle imaginable. The whispers when she'd first arrived as a resident, that she was just there to fill a quota. The subtle and not-so-subtle suggestions that she focus on less demanding specialties. The male colleagues who'd assumed her early successes were flukes rather than the result of brilliant surgical innovation. She'd proved them all wrong, one surgery at a time, one published paper at a time, one saved life at a time, until even her harshest critics couldn't deny her excellence, until the same people who doubted her were begging to be part of her surgical teams. "Mom, Mom!" exclamation mark. The voice of her 8-year-old son Richmond cut through her professional reverie as she entered her office. He was supposed to be at his advanced STEM program, but instead sat perched on her leather office chair, his school tablet displaying complex coding sequences that would challenge most adults. "Richmond, sweetheart, what are you doing here?" Zora's professional mask melted into maternal concern as she crossed the room, her hands automatically smoothing down his unruly curls. Another inheritance from her side of the family, along with his deep brown eyes and brilliant mind. Richmond explained, his fingers flying across the tablet screen. "So Odette brought me here instead. Look what I'm working on. It's an AI algorithm that could help predict neural response patterns in trauma patients. Like your research." Zora's chest swelled with pride, even as a small frown creased her forehead. Odette Laurent, their French-educated nanny, stood in the corner of the office, her posture perfect as always, in her elegantly casual outfit that somehow made even Zora's designer wardrobe feel slightly overdone. "I hope you don't mind, madame." Odette's accent caressed each word with practiced charm. "Richmond was so excited to show you his project, and I know how you value his intellectual development." "Of course not," Zora replied, even as something nagged at the back of her mind. Had Odette's hand lingered a moment too long on Richmond's shoulder? Was that gleam in her ice-blue eyes something more than professional pride in her young charge? Zora pushed the thoughts aside. Odette had been with them for nearly a year now, and she'd been nothing short of perfect. Her references had been impeccable. Graduations from the finest schools in Paris, recommendations from some of Europe's most elite families. More importantly, Richmond adored her, and she seemed to genuinely return his affection. Mrs. Amador. Her assistant appeared in the doorway. "Mr. Amador is on line 1. Something about tonight's charity gala?" Zora picked up her office phone, warmth flooding her voice at the sound of her husband's smooth baritone. Vermont Amador had that effect on people, that ability to make whoever he was talking to feel like the most important person in the world. It was part of what made him such a successful CEO, turning a small AI startup into $1 billion tech empire in just 5 years. "Mon cœur," he said, using the French endearment he'd picked up during their honeymoon in Paris. "I just wanted to remind you about tonight. The governor will be there, and the Foundation's Neural Tech Initiative." "I haven't forgotten," Zora assured him, watching as Odette helped Richmond pack up his tablet. "My last surgery's scheduled to end at 4. Plenty of time to get home and change." "Perfect. Odette, you'll stay late tonight to watch Richmond?" Zora blinked, suddenly registering that Vermont had switched to speakerphone at some point. A slight flush colored Odette's pale cheeks as she answered, "But of course, monsieur. Richmond and I will have a wonderful evening." Something about the exchange sent a slight shiver down Zora's spine, but she dismissed it. She was just being paranoid, letting the stress of her upcoming surgery affect her judgment. After all, this was her life, her perfect, enviable life that she'd worked so hard to build. The view from her office window showcased the Seattle skyline, the Space Needle rising like an exclamation point against the unusually clear sky. In the distance, she could just make out the sleek lines of the Sterling Amador mansion, perched in the exclusive hills above Lake Washington. The house had been a wedding gift from Vermont. 12,000 square feet of ultra-modern luxury that graced the covers of architectural magazines. "I should go," Vermont was saying. "Board meeting in 5. Je t'aime, my brilliant surgeon." "Love you too," Zora replied, ending the call as her son bounded over for a goodbye hug. "Come, Richmond," Odette called softly. "We should let your mother prepare for her surgery." As they left, Zora caught a glimpse of their reflection in the window. Her beautiful boy holding hands with the elegant Nanny, their departing figures framed by the massive windows and Seattle's skyline beyond. A perfect tableau of her perfect life. If only she'd known then that perfection was just an illusion, as fragile as a soap bubble and twice as likely to burst. If only she'd noticed how Odette's graceful exit included the slightest sway of hips, or how her son's coding project bore a striking resemblance to Vermont's latest patent application. If only she'd recognized that the French endearments her husband had learned on their honeymoon now rolled off his tongue with suspicious fluency. But Zora Sterling Amador, for all her surgical precision and scientific brilliance, was blind to the cancer growing in her perfect life. By the time she recognized the symptoms, the disease would have already metastasized, spreading its poison through every aspect of her carefully constructed world. How blind she had been, how foolish, how trusting. Paradise was about to be lost, and the fall would shake Seattle's social scene to its very foundations. Chapter 2. The First Cut. The betrayal revealed itself on a rain-soaked Tuesday evening that would forever divide Zora's life into before and after. Her Tesla navigated the winding road up to their hillside mansion, its automatic lights cutting through an unseasonable fog that had rolled in from the sound. The throbbing in her temples, the migraine that had forced her to cancel her final surgery of the day, felt like a premonition of the pain to come. The first whisper of wrongness came at the security gate. The house beyond loomed dark, except for a warm glow from Vermont's home office window. Strange, given that he'd mentioned a late board meeting downtown. Stranger still was the absence of Richmond's usual welcoming shout, though she knew he had his advanced coding class until 7 on Tuesdays. The second warning bell chimed in her surgeon's mind as she stepped into their massive foyer. Odette's designer handbag sat on the Carrara marble console table, despite her scheduled hours ending at 5 on Tuesdays. Next to it, a half-empty glass of Vermont's prized Bordeaux, the 1982 Chateau Lafite Rothschild he reserved for special occasions, a $4,000 bottle she'd given him for their last anniversary. Zora's fingers brushed against the cool marble as she steadied herself, her other hand instinctively smoothing down her silk Hermes blouse. The house was unnaturally quiet, save for the soft hum of the climate control system and voices. Muffled, intimate voices drifting from Vermont's office. She moved through the house like a ghost, her Louboutins silent against the heated limestone floors. Each step brought new details into sharp focus, like symptoms presenting themselves to her trained diagnostic eye. Vermont's suit jacket draped carelessly over a kitchen chair, he who insisted on proper closet storage for all his bespoke Tom Ford pieces. A woman's cashmere wrap that she recognized as Odette's, puddled on the stairs like spilled cream. The voices grew clearer as she approached the office. Vermont's rich baritone, softer than she'd ever heard it. "We need to be more careful, mon amour. Zora's not stupid. She's the most brilliant woman I know." A feminine laugh, throaty and intimate, followed by Odette's accented purr. The brilliant doctor, Sterling Amador, so focused on saving everyone else's lives that she can't see her own crumbling. When was the last time she attended one of Richmond's coding presentations? I'm the one who's there, encouraging his dreams. Odette. Vermont's voice held a warning note, but also something else. Desire, poorly disguised. "It's true, mon cœur, I'm the one who packs his lunch with little French notes. I'm the one who soothes him after his nightmares. I'm the one who's here, Vermont. Not her, never her." Zora's hands, capable of the most delicate neural procedures, trembled as she reached for the door handle. But she stopped herself, years of surgical training kicking in. Never make an incision without a complete diagnosis. Never act without full information. Instead, she forced herself to listen, each word a precise cut into her heart. "I love how you are with him," Vermont was saying, his voice thick with emotion. "How natural you are together. Sometimes I watch you two and think—" "Then leave her," Odette's voice dropped to a seductive whisper. "We could take Richmond and start fresh. Create our own family without living in the shadow of the great doctor. Sterling Amador's career. The rustle of fabric, a soft moan, the distinct sound of a kiss." Zora's surgical mind catalogued each symptom of her disintegrating marriage with clinical precision, even as her heart hemorrhaged in her chest. How long had this been happening? How many signs had she missed, distracted by her demanding career and her absolute trust in her husband? Memory after memory surfaced, recontextualizing themselves with brutal clarity. The way Vermont had championed hiring Odette, despite her excessive salary requirements, how he'd started working from home more often after she joined their household. The lingering touches during family dinners that Zora had dismissed as accidental. The way Odette's eyes followed Vermont around rooms, hungry and possessive. The scent of Odette's signature Joe Malone perfume, wood sage and sea salt. Zora's brain supplied helpfully, remembering the Christmas gift Vermont had selected for the nanny, wafted through the crack under the office door, mingling with Vermont's familiar Tom Ford cologne. The combination made her stomach turn. But it was the casual way they'd discussed Richmond that truly ignited Zora's rage. How dare they? How fucking dare they use her child as a pawn in their sordid game? Richmond, her brilliant, sensitive boy, who still crawled into her bed during thunderstorms, who FaceTimed her during every surgical break just to share his latest coding breakthrough, who wore her old medical school sweatshirt like armor, proudly telling anyone who would listen that he was going to be a doctor-scientist like his mom. The fury that rose in her chest was prehistoric, volcanic, the rage of every betrayed woman since the dawn of time. Her fingers curled into fists so tight, her manicured nails cut half-moons into her palms. The urge to burst through that door, to catch them in their betrayal, to rain holy hell down upon their heads was nearly overwhelming. But Zora Sterling Amador hadn't become one of the country's top neurosurgeons by giving in to impulse. Surgery required precision, planning, a steady hand, and an even steadier mind. Revenge, she decided in that moment, would require the same. She forced her breathing to slow, using the same techniques she employed during particularly challenging procedures. Her mind, despite the emotional chaos, began formulating a surgical plan of attack. She would need evidence, documentation, a strategy that would excise this cancer from her life while leaving her and Richmond not just intact but stronger. The sounds from the office grew more heated, more intimate. Zora silently retreated, her steps measured and deliberate. In the kitchen, she poured herself a glass of Vermont's precious Bordeaux, noting with clinical detachment that her hands had stopped shaking. She took a single sip, letting the $900 wine roll across her tongue as she pulled out her phone. First call, her assistant, cancelling all non-emergency surgeries for the next 2 days. Second call, a discreet inquiry to the city's most ruthless divorce attorney. Third call, her bank, about setting up a separate account. Fourth call, her personal investigator, the one she kept on retainer for background checks on potential department hires. By the time she heard Vermont's office door open 45 minutes later, Zora had composed herself into a masterpiece of normalcy. She sat at the kitchen island, surgical journals spread before her, reading glasses perched on her nose, as if this were any other evening. "Darling!" Vermont's surprise was evident, his usual smooth confidence fractured just slightly. "I thought you had a full surgical schedule today." Zora looked up, taking in his slightly disheveled appearance, with the same attention to detail she gave her surgical patients. His collar, slightly askew, a faint smudge of lipstick, hastily wiped away but still visible to her trained eye, the guilty flush beneath his perfect tan. Behind him, Odette appeared, her own composure perfectly restored, save for the slightly swollen state of her lips. "Dr. Sterling Amador. I didn't realize you'd be home early. Richmond is still at his coding class. I was just reviewing some educational materials with Mr. Amador." "Of course you were," Zora replied smoothly, her smile as sharp as her surgical scalpels. "I'm sure it was very educational." She took another sip of wine, watching them over the rim of her glass. They had no idea what was coming. No idea that their little paradise was about to become a war zone. No idea that they'd just awakened something in Zora that would destroy them both. Let them think they were clever. Let them believe they'd fooled her. Zora had learned long ago that the most dangerous cuts were the ones you never saw coming. This betrayal was just the first incision. The real surgery was yet to begin. Chapter 3. Gathering Storms. In the days following her discovery, Zora transformed her trauma into an arsenal. Her surgical precision found a new purpose beyond the operating room, every move calculated, every piece of evidence meticulously documented. While Vermont and Odette played house behind her back, she became a ghost in her own home, watching, recording, gathering the weapons that would eventually destroy them. The first piece of evidence arrived on her encrypted laptop at 3 a.m., 3 days after that fateful evening. Her private investigator, Marcus Chen, had outdone himself. His email contained a comprehensive dossier on Odette Laurent, or rather, Odette Dubois, as she'd been known in Paris. The perfectly curated references, the glowing recommendations from European elite families, all fabricated, purchased through an elaborate network of high-end fixers. Zora sat in her home office, the blue light of her screen illuminating her face as she absorbed every damning detail. Odette had left a trail of destroyed marriages across Europe. 3 different wealthy families, torn apart by her calculated seductions. She'd simply never stayed in one place long enough for anyone to connect the dots. "Oh, you clever little snake," Zora whispered, scrolling through surveillance photos of Odette meeting with a known document forger in Paris 2 years ago. "But you've never met a predator like me." Her phone buzzed, a text from Vermont. "Working late tonight, mon coeur. Don't wait up." Zora's lips curved into a bitter smile as she glanced at the GPS tracker data on her screen, showing Vermont's Tesla headed not toward his office, but to a discreet boutique hotel downtown. The same hotel where, according to her investigator's report, Odette had booked a suite using a credit card Vermont had given her for household expenses. She opened her evidence folder, already meticulously organized with subfolders for financial records, surveillance footage, and intercepted communications. A new video file appeared, footage from the tiny camera she'd had installed in Vermont's home office. She hesitated only a moment before pressing play. The screen filled with images of Vermont and Odette, their betrayal now documented in high definition. But it was their conversation that made Zora's blood run cold. "We need to move faster," Odette was saying, perched on Vermont's desk in a way that made her expensive skirt ride up her thighs. "I've been researching schools in Paris. Richmond would love the international program at École Jeunesse." Vermont ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "It's not that simple. Zora would never agree to let Richmond leave the country." "Then we don't ask." Odette's voice hardened. "I have contacts who can help expedite certain documents. Once we're in France with Richmond, it would be very difficult for her to do anything about it." Zora's hand tightened on her mouse until the plastic creaked. They weren't just having an affair. They were plotting to kidnap her son, her brilliant, beautiful boy who just that morning crawled into her bed with his tablet, eager to show her his latest coding project. "I don't know, Odette. Kidnapping? That's ... Not kidnapping, mon amour. Protecting our family. You've seen how..." Zora's career always comes first. "Richmond needs a real mother, not a surgeon who sees him between operations." The footage continued, but Zora had seen enough. She closed the video and opened her secure messaging app, sending a brief text to her attorney. "Meeting. Tomorrow. Bring your best custody lawyer." Her next move required a different kind of precision. She pulled up the financial records she'd been gathering. Every penny Vermont had spent on Odette, every hotel room, every gift, every forged document. But more importantly, she'd found irregularities in his company's books. Vermont had been cooking the numbers, inflating the success of his AI startup's latest project. A project, she realized with growing fury, that was based on concepts she'd casually discussed with him over dinner. Her own neurosurgical research, twisted into promises of AI breakthroughs that didn't exist, used to secure millions in investor funding. Her finger hovered over the send button of an email to the SEC. Not yet, she decided. That card would be played later, when it could do maximum damage. A soft knock at her office door made her quickly minimize her screens. "Mom!" Richmond's voice was sleepy. "I had a bad dream." Zora's heart clenched as she opened her arms to her son. He climbed into her lap, all gangly limbs and wild curls, smelling of the expensive French shampoo Odette had insisted on buying him. "Want to talk about it?" she asked, running her fingers through his hair. Richmond buried his face in her neck. "I dreamed you were gone. Odette said, she said you didn't want us anymore, that you loved your patients more than me." The rage that filled Zora's chest was atomic. She pulled back slightly, forcing Richmond to meet her eyes. "Listen to me, baby. There is nothing in this world, no patient, no surgery, no career, that I love more than you. Nothing and no one will ever change that. Do you understand?" He nodded, his brilliant eyes searching her face. "Promise you won't leave. I promise." She held him closer, already mentally revising her plans. The destruction of Vermont and Odette would have to be absolute, but it would also have to be careful. Surgical. She wouldn't let Richmond become collateral damage in this war. After tucking Richmond back into bed, Zora returned to her office with renewed purpose. She began composing emails to hospital board members who owed her favors, to tech journalists always hungry for scandal, to Vermont's investors who might be interested in knowing exactly what they'd funded. A text lit up her phone, a photo from Odette showing Richmond asleep at his coding class, captioned, "Our precious boy needs his rest. Don't worry about coming home early tomorrow. I'll take good care of him." Zora's smile was all teeth as she saved the message to her evidence folder. "Our boy? Oh, you've overplayed your hand, ma chérie." She worked through the night, building her case with the same meticulous attention she gave to planning complex surgeries. Diagnosis, terminal betrayal, treatment plan, complete excision of the diseased tissue from her life. Prognosis, devastating for the guilty parties. Dawn found her still at her desk, surrounded by the digital weapons she'd gathered. Outside her window, storm clouds gathered over Seattle, nature itself seeming to mirror her darkening purpose. Let Vermont and Odette enjoy their stolen moments, their secret plans, their illusion of control. Zora Sterling Amador had spent her career playing God in the operating room, holding lives in her skilled hands. Now those hands would deliver a different kind of justice. The storm was coming, and when it broke, it would wash her world clean of their betrayal. She closed her laptop, just as the first thunder rolled across the sky. Time to get ready for work, to maintain the facade of normalcy while her plans crystallized. She had surgeries scheduled, literal lives in her hands, and she would perform them with her usual excellence. But in the back of her mind, a different kind of operation was being planned, one that would require all her skill, all her precision, all her ruthless determination. And unlike her medical procedures, this one wouldn't end with saving lives. It would end with destruction, carefully orchestrated and precisely executed. The storm was gathering, and Zora was ready to become its center. Chapter 4. Thunder Breaks. The Seattle Science Fair transformed the city's grand convention center into a showcase of young brilliance. Hundreds of display boards lined the vast space, each representing months of work by ambitious students. But none drew more attention than Richmond Sterling Amador's exhibit, Neural Networks in Emotional Recognition, a new approach to AI-human integration. Zora had rearranged 3 major surgeries to be there early, her Louboutins clicking against the polished floor as she navigated through proud parents and nervous children. Her son's project was the culmination of months of work, combining her neurosurgical insights with cutting-edge AI concepts. The same concepts, she noted bitterly, that Vermont was using to secure millions in fraudulent investments. She rounded the corner to Richmond's assigned space and froze. The sight before her made her blood turn to ice, then instantly boil. Vermont and Odette stood at Richmond's display, their bodies curved toward each other like magnetic poles finding their natural alignment. Odette's hand rested on Vermont's back, her thumb moving in small circles against his expensive suit jacket. They were laughing at some private joke, while Richmond chatted excitedly with his friends nearby, oblivious to the intimate tableau behind him, the perfect little family without her. Something snapped inside Zora. All her careful planning, all her surgical precision, all her calculated restraint. It evaporated in an instant of pure, volcanic rage. "How dare you!" Her voice cut through the ambient noise like a scalpel through flesh. Heads turned. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Richmond's excited chatter died in his throat as he spun around, eyes wide. "How dare you stand there, playing happy family with my son?" Zora's voice carried all the authority of her operating room command. "Did you think I wouldn't notice? Did you think I was too busy saving lives to see you destroying mine?" Vermont's face drained of color as his carefully constructed world began to crumble. "Zora, darling, you're making a scene." "A scene?" Zora's laugh was sharp enough to draw blood. "Oh, I'm just getting started. Should I tell everyone here about the hotel receipts, the forged documents, the plans to kidnap my son to Paris?" Odette stepped forward, her perfect composure cracking slightly. "Dr. Sterling Amador, please think of Richmond. Don't you dare speak his name." Zora's fury was transcendent now, years of pain and betrayal crystallizing into this moment. "You come into my home, seduce my husband, try to steal my child. You really thought you could take on a black woman who fought her way to the top of neurosurgery and win?" The crowd had grown, phones discreetly recording what would surely become Seattle's most talked-about social media event of the year. But Zora didn't care. Her eyes locked onto Vermont, who was trying desperately to maintain his CEO composure. "Honey, let's discuss this privately. Like how you privately discussed your plans to take my son, or how you privately used my research to scam your investors." Zora's smile was all teeth. "Speaking of investors, I wonder how they'll react to knowing your breakthrough AI algorithm was based on stolen concepts from my neural pathway research." Vermont's face went from pale to ashen. "You wouldn't." "I already have." Zora held up her phone, displaying an email sent moments ago to the SEC, his board of directors, and several prominent tech journalists. "Consider this a lesson in neural networks, darling. Every action has consequences." The chaos that erupted in the convention center was electric. Parents pulled their children closer, torn between propriety and fascination, as Seattle's most prominent power couple imploded before their eyes. "Mom?" Richmond's voice cut through the tension, small and confused. He moved away from his friends, his science project forgotten. "What's happening?" Odette reached for him instinctively. "Mon petit, don't touch him!" Zora's command froze Odette mid-motion. "Richmond, come here, baby!" But Richmond stood rooted between them, his brilliant mind processing the scene with devastating clarity. "The hotel meetings," he said quietly. "The whispers when Mom was at work. The French lessons you said were our secret." His eyes filled with tears as he looked at his father. "You were going to take me away from Mom." Vermont stepped forward, his CEO charm kicking into crisis management mode. "Son, it's complicated. Adult relationships are built on trust," Zora cut in. "Something your father forgot when he let this woman manipulate her way into our lives." Odette's perfect facade finally cracked. "Manipulate? I love Vermont. I love Richmond. While you were busy with your precious surgeries, I was here being the mother he needed." The slap echoed through the convention center before anyone registered Zora's movement. Odette staggered back, her pale cheek blooming red. "I have spent my entire career saving lives." Zora's voice was deadly quiet now, and every minute between surgeries, every break, every free moment was devoted to my son. I FaceTimed him between operations. I helped with homework at 3 a.m. after 30-hour shifts. I built this life, this family, with my own hands. And you thought you could just slide in and take it. Security was moving through the crowd now, drawn by the commotion. But they hesitated, unsure how to handle such prominent figures in such a public meltdown. "You want to talk about being a mother," Zora continued, pulling out her phone. "Let's talk about Odette Dubois and her trail of destroyed families across Europe. Let's discuss the restraining orders, the fraudulent references, the pattern of seducing wealthy fathers and manipulating their children." Odette's face went from red to white. "How did you—" "I'm a surgeon, honey. I know how to do thorough research." Zora turned to the growing crowd. And Vermont, my brilliant, faithless husband. Let's talk about how many of his company's breakthroughs came from casual discussions of my research over dinner. How many millions did you secure based on stolen concepts, darling? Vermont lunged forward, grabbing her arm. Zora, stop this now. Security, a sharp voice cut through the chaos. The head of the Science Fair Committee, Dr. Patricia Chen, strode forward. Mr. Amador, remove your hand from your wife immediately. Richmond broke free from his frozen state, running to Zora and wrapping his arms around her waist. She held him close, feeling his tears soak through her silk blouse. I don't want to go to Paris, he sobbed. I don't want a different mother. I want you. The crowd's murmuring grew louder. Phones captured every moment, every tear, every betrayed look. Vermont's carefully curated public image crumbled in real time. This isn't over, he hissed, low enough that only Zora could hear. Oh, but it is, she replied with surgical calm. Check your phone, darling. Your board of directors is calling an emergency meeting. The SEC has some questions about your funding claims. And those tech journalists you've been courting, they're very interested in the real story behind your AI breakthroughs. As if on cue, Vermont's phone began buzzing frantically. Multiple notifications lit up his screen, emails, texts, calls from his board members, investors, lawyers. Odette began backing away, her survival instincts kicking in. But Zora wasn't finished. Running already? But you haven't met the private investigators who've documented every hotel meeting, every forged document, every plan to kidnap my son. The police are particularly interested in that last part. Security finally reached them, creating a barrier between the fractured family and the gawking crowd. Dr. Chen took charge, her voice carrying authority. Mr. Amador, Ms. Laurent, I think it's best if you leave. Dr. Sterling Amador, would you and Richmond like to be escorted to a private room? Zora looked down at her science fair project display, the neural network he'd built, combining principles from her research with his own innovative ideas. No, she said firmly. My son worked too hard on this project to have it overshadowed by adult betrayals. Richmond, do you want to explain your work to the judges? Richmond wiped his eyes, looking up at her with a mix of pain and determination that broke her heart. Can you stay with me? Every second, she promised, running her fingers through his curls. I'm not going anywhere, baby. As Vermont and Odette were escorted out, their world collapsing around them, Zora stood tall beside her son's project. Let the whispers spread. Let the videos go viral. Let Seattle's social elite feast on the scandal. She'd struck the first decisive blow, but this was just the beginning. The real surgery, the complete excision of Vermont and Odette from their lives, was still to come, and Zora Sterling Amador never left an operation unfinished. Sweet Revenge. Chapter 5. Calculated Moves. The morning after the science fair explosion, Zora sat in the tastefully appointed office of Diana Zhang, Seattle's most feared divorce attorney. Through floor-to-ceiling windows, the city spread out below them like a chessboard, and Zora was ready to play every piece. Impressive, Diana murmured, reviewing the evidence dossier Zora had compiled. Most clients come to me with suspicions. You've brought me a complete case. Zora's fingers traced the edge of her Hermes scarf, a habit from surgery, keeping her hands steady. I'm thorough. Thorough doesn't begin to cover it. Diana looked up, her sharp eyes gleaming. GPS tracking, financial records, surveillance footage, documented kidnapping plans, and this SEC investigation into Vermont's company? The timing is exquisite. I believe in precision, Zora replied, her voice carrying the same calm she used in the operating room. And speaking of precision, what can you tell me about freezing assets? Diana's perfectly painted lips curved into a predatory smile. As of 8 a.m., every joint account has been frozen. Vermont's personal accounts too, given the evidence of fraud. He tried to access his private offshore account an hour ago. Imagine his surprise when he found that frozen as well. A soft knock interrupted them. Diana's assistant entered with a tablet. "You need to see this." The screen displayed breaking news. Tech unicorn in turmoil. CEO Vermont Amador steps down amid fraud allegations and personal scandal. "Perfect timing," Zora said, scanning the article. Her methodical plan was unfolding exactly as designed. The headline was just the beginning. Buried in the fourth paragraph was the real bomb. An anonymous source revealing how Vermont had misappropriated company resources to fund his affair, including a corporate apartment registered to consulting services. Diana scrolled through her tablet. "Vermont's board of directors is meeting right now. My contact says it's a bloodbath. Your evidence of him stealing your neurosurgical research for his AI patents? That sent his investors into a panic. And Odette..." Zora's voice carried a dangerous edge. "Ah." Diana pulled up another file. "Ms. Laurent, or should I say Ms. Dubois, attempted to book a flight to Paris this morning. Interesting, considering the custody modification papers we filed at midnight, specifically prohibiting Richmond from leaving the state." Zora's smile was razor-sharp. Did she make the flight? Let's just say airport security was very interested in those forged documents you uncovered. She's currently being questioned by federal authorities about potential immigration fraud. The office door opened again. Marcus Chen, Zora's private investigator, strode in, his usually impassive face showing a hint of satisfaction. "The European files are live," he reported. "3 separate families in France and Switzerland have come forward, confirming Odette's pattern of targeting wealthy fathers. One ex-wife is flying in to testify about a similar kidnapping attempt." Zora leaned back in her chair, her surgical calm masking the storm of satisfaction within. "And the tech journalists?" Marcus handed her his phone. On the screen, a prominent tech blog was running a devastating exposé. AI innovation or intellectual theft. The real story behind Amador Tech's breakthrough algorithm. The article detailed how Vermont had systematically stolen concepts from his wife's groundbreaking neurosurgical research, translating medical innovations into tech promises he couldn't deliver. Investor comments were scathing. Share prices were plummeting. "His board wants a private meeting with you," Diana added. "Apparently they're very interested in the original research their stolen algorithm was based on." "Schedule it for tomorrow," Zora replied. "After my morning surgery, I want Vermont to have one more night of watching his empire crumble." Her phone buzzed, a text from the hospital board president. "Saw the news. Your position and research grants are secure. Full board support for your predicament." Another message followed from her surgical team. "We're behind you, Doctor. S.A. That bastard picked the wrong neurosurgeon to betray." The support meant more than she'd expected. She'd fought so hard for her place in that hospital, earned every scrap of respect through brilliant work and innovative procedures. The thought of Vermont and Odette trying to paint her as a neglectful mother, too focused on her career. "Ms. Zhang?" Diana's assistant appeared again. "Mr. Amador's lawyer is calling. They want to discuss a private settlement." Diana looked at Zora, who shook her head. "No deals, no privacy. They wanted to destroy me quietly, thought they could smuggle my son out of the country while I was busy saving lives. Let them face the consequences in public." "Speaking of public," Marcus interjected, "the science fair videos have gone viral. Surgical revenge is trending. The internet has officially taken your side." Zora pulled up one of the videos on her phone. The footage was damning. Vermont's aggressive grab of her arm, Odette's mask slipping to reveal her true nature, and most importantly, Richmond's tearful realization of their betrayal. "Has Richmond seen any of this?" Diana asked softly. "He's at home with my mother," Zora replied. She flew in from Atlanta this morning. He needs family right now. Real family, not imposters playing house with his emotions. Another knock, another update. Vermont had been officially removed as CEO. The board was appointing an interim leader while they assessed the damage. Their stock had dropped 40% since opening bell. "Your next move?" Diana asked, though her tone suggested she already knew. Zora stood, smoothing her Chanel dress. "First, I have a meeting with the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. They're very interested in how Vermont used falsified research to secure investments. Then, I'm giving an exclusive interview to the Wall Street Journal, setting the record straight about how a black female neurosurgeon's innovations were stolen and misused by her trust fund husband. And Odette. Immigration fraud is just the beginning. Those 3 families in Europe, once they understand how she manipulated their children, used them as pawns in her schemes. Let's just say French prisons aren't as comfortable as French chateaux." Diana's smile was appreciative. "You've thought of everything." "I'm a neurosurgeon," Zora replied, gathering her Birkin bag. "I don't begin an operation without mapping every possible complication." Vermont and Odette thought they were dealing with a distracted working mother. They didn't realize they were facing a woman who holds lives in her hands every day, who makes decisions that determine whether people wake up whole or don't wake up at all. She paused at the door, her voice taking on a surgical chill. "They tried to cut me out of my own life. Now they'll learn what it means to face someone who knows how to wield a scalpel." Marcus cleared his throat. "Vermont's lawyer is calling again. Apparently, he's willing to give you everything. The house, full custody, his company shares." "Too late." Zora's voice was final. "He was willing to let that woman steal my child. There's no settlement large enough to pay for that betrayal." As she strode out of Diana's office, her phone lit up with another news alert. "Breaking. Federal agents raid Amador Tech headquarters." The pieces were falling exactly where she'd placed them. Vermont's career was in ruins. Odette's carefully constructed identity was unraveling. And this was just the beginning. Zora had one more stop to make, her son's favorite ice cream shop. Because in the midst of executing the perfect revenge, she hadn't forgotten what mattered most, showing Richmond that no power on earth could shake a mother's love. Let Vermont and Odette scramble to save themselves. Let them feel the walls closing in, the ground crumbling beneath their feet. Let them finally understand what it means to underestimate a woman who cuts into brains for a living. The storm she'd unleashed was just beginning to break. Sweet Revenge. Chapter 6. The Public Fall, Vermont. Amador's world collapsed with the precision of a controlled demolition. The morning sun hadn't yet touched Seattle's skyline when his executive parking spot at Amador Tech was reassigned. His biometric access revoked, his corner office being packed up by HR representatives while federal agents combed through servers and hard drives. He sat in his Tesla, watching through tinted windows as reporters gathered outside the building like vultures. His phone hadn't stopped buzzing since dawn. Lawyers, board members, investors, all demanding explanations he couldn't give. The stock had dropped another 30% in pre-market trading. His personal wealth, once valued at over $2 billion, was evaporating by the minute. "Mr. Amador!" A reporter spotted him, triggering an avalanche of flashing cameras and shouted questions. "What do you say to allegations that you stole your wife's medical research? Is it true you planned to kidnap your son? Comment on reports of immigration fraud involving your nanny?" Vermont's perfectly manicured hand trembled as he adjusted his Tom Ford tie, a nervous habit he'd developed during board meetings. But this wasn't a board meeting. This was an execution, orchestrated by the woman he'd foolishly underestimated. His phone buzzed again, Odette's face lighting up the screen. He declined the call, remembering their last conversation 6 hours ago. She'd been hysterical, calling from a federal detention center after being pulled off her flight to Paris. Immigration fraud was just the beginning of her problems. 3 prominent European families had come forward, each telling eerily similar stories of the sophisticated French nanny who'd infiltrated their homes and nearly destroyed their families. The Wall Street Journal's headline glared at him from his phone. Tech CEOs fall from grace, how a neurosurgeon's brilliant research was stolen and misused. The article was devastating. Zora had given an exclusive interview, methodically detailing how he'd twisted her groundbreaking neural pathway research into empty tech promises. She'd provided emails, recorded conversations, patent applications that bore suspicious similarities to her published medical papers. But worse than the professional destruction was the personal humiliation. The science fair video had gone viral. #surgical revenge, trending nationwide. Every news outlet was running the footage. His aggressive grab of Zora's arm, Richmond's tearful realization of betrayal, Odette's mask of sophistication cracking to reveal the calculating manipulator beneath. His new lawyer's voicemail was succinct. Don't leave the state. Don't contact your wife. Don't try to access any accounts. They're all frozen pending the federal investigation. And for God's sake, don't talk to the press. A sharp rap on his car window made him jump. Patricia Chen, the head of his board of directors, stood there with 2 security guards. Her face was granite. The board meeting is starting, Vermont. Your presence is required for the formal removal vote. He could barely feel his legs as he walked through the gauntlet of reporters. Cameras flashed, questions flew, but all he could hear was the echo of Zora's voice from the science fair. You really thought you could take on a black woman who fought her way to the top of neurosurgery and win? The boardroom was packed, every member present for his public execution. On the massive screen behind his soon-to-be former chair, a live stream showed the company's stock price in free fall. Before we begin, Patricia's voice cut through the tension, we have a guest joining us virtually. The screen split, and there was Zora. She'd chosen to take this call from her operating room, still in her surgical scrubs, her team visible behind her. The message was clear. While his world burned, she was saving lives. Dr. Sterling Amador. Patricia nodded respectfully. Thank you for making time between surgeries to discuss the true origins of our AI algorithm. Vermont watched, helpless, as his wife systematically dismantled every technical claim he'd made to investors. She walked the board through her original research, showing how he'd stolen and oversimplified her complex neurological concepts to promise technological breakthroughs he could never deliver. In conclusion, Zora's voice was pure surgical precision. Your entire AI platform is based on a fundamental misunderstanding of neural pathway adaptation. Vermont didn't just steal my research, he corrupted it. Any promises made to investors about immediate applications are, scientifically speaking, impossible. The board erupted into chaos. Investors who joined virtually began demanding immediate action. The company's general counsel looked physically ill. One more thing, Zora added, her smile razor-sharp. I've been approached by several of your competitors about properly developing these concepts. I look forward to those discussions once my non-compete agreement with Amador Tech is voided due to fraud. The vote to remove him was unanimous. As security escorted him out, his company badge and phone confiscated, Vermont's personal phone buzzed one final time. A text from Odette. The prosecutors are offering a deal. I'm sorry, mon amour, but I have to think of myself now. He emerged from the building to find the press crowd had doubled. But now there was a new question being shouted. Mr. Amador, what's your response to reports that Odette Laurent has agreed to testify about the kidnapping plot? In a penthouse suite across town, Zora watched the coverage while preparing for her next surgery. Her mother sat beside her, holding Richmond as he worked on a new coding project, one that would be entirely his own, not secretly filtered through his father's tech company. "Mom," Richmond looked up from his tablet, "is Dad going to jail?" Zora chose her words carefully. "Your father made some very bad choices, baby. Now he has to face the consequences." "Like in your surgeries? When you have to cut out the bad parts to save the patient?" Zora pulled him close, breathing in the scent of his hair, now free of Odette's expensive French shampoo. "Exactly like that. Sometimes healing requires removing what's harmful, even when it hurts." Her phone lit up with another news alert. Amador Tech faces class action lawsuit from investors. The surgery wasn't quite complete, but the diseased tissue was being excised. Vermont's empire was crumbling. Odette's web of lies was unraveling. And Zora, she had another life to save on her operating table. After all, she was a surgeon, and surgeons always finished what they started. Chapter 7. A Son's Truth. The evening sky over Seattle faded to twilight as Zora sat in Richmond's bedroom, watching him sleep. His face, so much like hers, was finally peaceful after weeks of turmoil. The papers scattered across his desk told their own story. Half-finished coding projects, drawings of neural networks, and a crumpled family portrait he'd torn in half, separating Vermont and Odette from himself and his mother. A soft knock at the door revealed Zora's mother, Dr. Regina Sterling, carrying 2 cups of her famous sweet tea. At 70, Regina remained as formidable as when she'd been the first black female cardiothoracic surgeon at Atlanta General. "He finally asleep," Regina handed Zora a cup, settling into the window seat. "Nightmares again," Zora whispered, her fingers gentle as she smoothed Richmond's curls. "He dreamt they succeeded, that he woke up in Paris with them, and I couldn't find him." Regina's face hardened. "I always knew that man wasn't good enough for you. Too smooth, too practiced, like a surgeon who cares more about his press coverage than his patients." Richmond stirred in his sleep, mumbling something that made Zora's heart clench. "Mom, don't let them take me." "I'm here, baby," she soothed, though he couldn't hear her. "No one's taking you anywhere." Regina set down her tea, watching her daughter with knowing eyes. "He told me something today, while you were in surgery, something you need to hear." Zora tensed. In the 3 weeks since the science fair explosion, Richmond had been slowly revealing fragments of Vermont and Odette's manipulation, each confession like a fresh wound. "Last Christmas," Regina continued, her voice low, "when you had that emergency craniotomy, Richmond came downstairs for water and found them in Vermont's office. They were looking at French school websites, talking about their new family. When Richmond got upset, Odette told him it would be their special secret, that sometimes parents need to be protected from things that might hurt them." The crystal tea glass in Zora's hand cracked under her grip. "They were gaslighting my child, making him keep their secrets." "There's more," Regina pressed on. Odette had been telling him stories about other children she'd cared for, kids who were happier after moving to France with their fathers. She'd show him photos of them at cafes, at the Eiffel Tower, making it seem magical. "Building his prison with golden bars," Zora's voice was surgical steel. "Did he say anything else?" Regina pulled out her phone, playing a video she'd recorded earlier. Richmond sat at his desk, speaking with the clear logic that made him exceptional at coding. "They had a pattern," his young voice explained. "Dad would praise my AI work, then say how French tech companies were more advanced. Odette would mention kids who got into special European science programs. They made it seem like Mom's job meant she didn't have time for that stuff. But," his voice cracked, "but Mom always made time. She helped me code between surgeries. She learned neural networks just to understand my projects. She's the one who taught me that real science is about helping people, not just making money." Richmond's eyes fluttered open at that moment, consciousness returning like a slow tide. "Mom, you're home early. Just finished my last surgery, baby. How are you feeling?" He sat up, rubbing sleep from his eyes, but his expression remained serious, too serious for an 8-year-old. "I made something for the judge tomorrow. Want to see?" From under his pillow, he pulled out a small leather notebook, the kind Zora used for surgical notes. Inside, in his precise handwriting, was a documented history of manipulation. October 15th. Odette said, "Real mums don't miss school presentations for surgery." But Mum was saving someone's life. November 3rd, Dad said French boarding schools let kids achieve their full potential, showed me websites during Mum's emergency surgery. December 25th, heard them planning Paris. Odette said Mum wouldn't notice because she's too busy saving strangers. The entries continued, page after page, each one dated and detailed, a child's scientific documentation of psychological abuse. "I remembered how you always say, 'Good science needs evidence,'" Richmond explained, his voice small but steady. "So I started keeping track of their patterns, like how you track neural responses in surgery." Zora pulled him into her arms, feeling his thin shoulders shake with suppressed emotion. "Oh, baby, my brilliant, brave boy." Regina cleared her throat, emotion making her usual cardiothoracic surgeon's composure waver. "He wants to testify tomorrow. Says he needs to help other kids whose parents might trust Odette." "Are you sure about this?" Zora asked her son gently. "The notebook might be enough." Richmond pulled back, meeting her eyes with a determination that mirrored her own. "You always say that healing means facing the truth, even when it hurts." He touched the notebook. "This is my truth, Mom, and maybe it will help the other kids, the ones in Odette's photos who disappeared to France." In that moment, Zora saw her son truly, not just as her beautiful, brilliant boy, but as a young scientist who turned his trauma into data, who documented his own psychological surgery. "Okay," she whispered, "but I'll be right there with you." "Promise?" "Always." She pulled him close again. "No surgery in the world is more important than being there for you." Regina watched them, her own surgical mind cataloguing the healing she saw happening. "You know," she said softly, "sometimes the strongest medical trials come from the patients themselves, their documented experiences, their lived data." Richmond nodded against Zora's shoulder. "Like my notebook. It's kind of like a clinical trial of their lives." "Exactly like that," Zora agreed, her heart swelling with pride, even as it ached. "And tomorrow, we present our findings to the judge." They spent the rest of the evening reviewing Richmond's notebook, mother and son speaking the language of science to help process their pain. Regina brought more sweet tea, listening as Richmond explained his documentation methodology with the precision of a young researcher. Tomorrow would bring the custody hearing, Richmond's testimony, another battle in their war for truth. Vermont's lawyers would try to paint Zora as a career-obsessed mother. Odette's team would attempt to justify her psychological manipulation of a child, but they didn't understand what they were facing. They thought they were up against a busy surgeon, too focused on saving lives to fight for her own. Instead, they would face the combined strength of 3 generations of medical brilliance. Regina Sterling, who'd broken barriers in cardiothoracic surgery, Zora Sterling Amador, who held lives in her skilled hands, and Richmond, who'd turned his inherited scientific mind toward documenting the truth. They had tried to break this family. Instead, they'd only proven how unbreakable it was. As Richmond finally drifted back to sleep, his notebook clutched to his chest like armor, Zora pulled out her phone to check the latest headlines. Breaking: European families come forward with similar accounts of Nanny's manipulation. Tech CEO's custody battle takes new turn as child prepares to testify. Immigration officials expand investigation into Odette Laurent's past. The surgery wasn't finished, but the prognosis was clear. Truth, like a well-wielded scalpel, would cut through every lie they'd told. And tomorrow, Richmond would ensure the cuts went deep enough to excise this cancer from their lives forever. Chapter 8. The Counterattack. The King County Courthouse loomed against the Seattle skyline, its granite facade a testament to justice's weight. Zora sat in the private chamber outside Family Courtroom 3, watching Richmond adjust his tie, the same Yale blue she wore for her most challenging surgeries. A good luck charm passed from mother to son. Diana Zhang, their attorney, reviewed her notes one final time. Remember, Richmond, just tell your truth. No one can argue with what you've seen and felt. Vermont's legal team had arrived in force, 5 attorneys from Seattle's most expensive firm. Through the chamber's glass walls, Zora could see them clustered around her soon-to-be ex-husband. Vermont's usual polished appearance had cracked. His Tom Ford suit couldn't hide the strain of 3 weeks under federal investigation. Odette sat separately with her immigration lawyer, her French sophistication dimmed by standard-issue court attire. No more Chanel suits or perfectly styled hair. She'd spent a week in detention before making bail, and it showed. Docket number 2025-4872, the bailiff called. Sterling Amador versus Amador. Custody determination. Richmond squeezed Zora's hand as they entered the courtroom. His notebook, now tagged and logged as evidence, lay on the counsel table like a bomb waiting to detonate. The Honorable Maria Chen surveyed the assembled parties, her expression suggesting she'd read every sordid detail of the case. Given the minor's request to testify, we'll begin there. Richmond Sterling Amador, please approach. Richmond walked to the witness stand with the same determined stride Zora used entering her operating room. After being sworn in, he pulled his notebook close. Richmond, Diana began gently, can you tell the court about this notebook? It's my evidence log, he replied, his voice clear and steady. Mom always says good science needs detailed documentation, so when Dad and Odette started acting weird, I documented everything. Vermont shifted uncomfortably as Richmond opened the notebook. Like on October 15th, Odette told me real moms don't miss school presentations for surgery, but Mom was missing my presentation to remove a tumor from a kid my age. She was saving someone's life. Continue, Judge Chen encouraged. They had a pattern. Dad would talk about French tech companies being better than American ones. Odette would tell stories about other kids she'd taken to France, how happy they were. But she never said why they left their mums behind. Odette's lawyer stood. Objection, speculation. Overruled, Judge Chen's eyes narrowed. Continue, Richmond. On Christmas Day I heard them planning. They thought I was asleep, but I came downstairs for water. They were looking at French schools online. Odette said, his voice wavered for the first time. She said Mum was too busy saving strangers to notice if I disappeared. The courtroom erupted. Judge Chen banged her gavel as Vermont's lawyers huddled in urgent consultation. Odette had gone pale. Did you tell anyone about this conversation? Diana asked. Number Odette caught me listening. She said it was our special secret, that sometimes we have to protect parents from things that might hurt them. She showed me pictures of other kids she'd taken to France, said we could be happy like them. Richmond's voice grew stronger. But she was lying. Mom always made time for me. She learned coding just to help with my projects. She FaceTimed during surgical breaks to check my math. When I had nightmares, she'd explain neural pathways until I fell asleep again. His eyes met Vermont's. Dad said French schools would help me achieve my full potential. But Mom already taught me the most important thing, that real science is about helping people, not just making money. Vermont's lead attorney stood. Your Honor, this testimony is clearly coached. Would you like to explain the French school applications found on your client's computer? Diana interrupted. Or the forged passport documents? Judge Chen raised her hand for silence. Richmond, you mentioned other children in Odette's photos. Can you elaborate? Yes, Your Honor. Richmond flipped through his notebook. She showed me pictures of 4 different kids. I wrote down their names and dates. Thomas Weber, age 9. Sophie Renault, age 7. Marcus and Maya Decker, ages 10 and 8. The immigration lawyer blanched. These were names from the European investigation, children from wealthy families whose fathers had disappeared with Odette years before. She said they were all happy in France now, but when I looked sad about leaving Mom, she got angry. Said sometimes children don't know what's best for them. That's when I started documenting everything. Judge Chen studied Richmond thoughtfully. Why did you decide to keep this notebook? Because I'm a scientist, like Mom. When you see a pattern, you document it. When something's wrong, you gather evidence. Mom saves lives by finding problems in people's brains and fixing them. I wanted to save our family by exposing the problem in our home. The courtroom fell silent. Richmond's words hung in the air, devastating in their childish wisdom. One final question, Diana said softly. What would you like the court to understand about your mother? Richmond sat straighter. That being a great doctor made her a better mom, not a worse one. She taught me that helping others matters more than making money, that science should heal, not hurt, and that real love doesn't ask you to keep secrets or leave people behind. Judge Chen had heard enough. We'll take a brief recess. When we return, I'll hear from the parents. Though I must say, her gaze swept over Vermont and Odette, this child has provided more honest testimony than I expect to hear from either of you. As Richmond left the witness stand, Zora enfolded him in her arms. Behind them, Vermont's lawyers were frantically reworking their strategy. Odette appeared to be fighting tears. You did it, baby, Zora whispered. You cut right through their lies. Richmond hugged her tighter. Like a surgeon, Mum, just like you taught me. Diana joined them, her expression triumphant. The immigration authorities want to speak with Odette about those other children. Seems Richmond's notebook just broke open cases in 3 countries. Zora watched her son return to his seat, proudly clutching the notebook that had exposed so many lies. He turned his pain into evidence, his fear into fact. Like mother, like son, both wielding truth like a scalpel, cutting away the cancer of betrayal. The real surgery was finally complete. Now, it was time for justice to close the wound. Chapter 9. Hidden Truths. The truth unraveled like a poorly sutured wound, messy and inevitable. In the sterile conference room of the FBI's Seattle field office, Zora watched through one-way glass as Odette's carefully constructed facade crumbled under questioning. Let's discuss Thomas Weber, Special Agent Lisa Morgan pressed, spreading photographs across the steel table. 9 years old when you were his nanny in Munich, disappeared with his father 3 months after you were hired. Odette's perfectly manicured nails drummed against her water glass. Her designer dress, likely her last for a while, seemed to strangle her. I told you I was merely the nanny. What Hans chose to do with his son was remarkably similar to what happened with the Renault family in Paris, Agent Morgan interrupted, and the Deckers in Amsterdam. And now your plans with Vermont Amador and Richmond. Zora's hands curled into fists as more photos appeared. Children's faces, all bearing the same lost look Richmond had worn these past months. Marcus and Maya Decker at a Paris cafe, their mother's frantic police reports ignored. Sophie Renault's school photos before and after Odette entered her life. Diana Zhang, standing beside Zora, made notes on her tablet. 4 families in 5 years, all wealthy. all ending in attempted or successful parental kidnapping. Richmond's notebook broke the pattern wide open. Ms. Laurent, Agent Morgan continued, or should I say Ms. Dubois, or perhaps Ms. Mercier, as you were known to the Deckers. Odette's composure finally shattered. Those children needed me. Their mothers were all like her. She jabbed a finger toward the mirror, somehow knowing Zora watched. Career women who put their ambitions ahead of their families. I gave those children real mothers by helping their fathers kidnap them. The agent's voice was steel. By manipulating children into keeping secrets, by destroying families, I protected them. Like I tried to protect Richmond from a mother who thinks cutting into brains is more important than what? Agent Morgan laid down one final photo. Richmond's science fair project, the neural network design that had inadvertently exposed everything. More important than nurturing his talents, supporting his dreams, teaching him the value of evidence and truth. Tears streaked Odette's expensive mascara. Vermont promised we'd be a real family, that Richmond would finally have a proper mother. While you helped him steal his company's AI technology. Another file appeared. We've found some interesting transfers between your French accounts and several cryptocurrency wallets, right around the time Vermont began presenting stolen research as technological breakthroughs. Zora stepped away from the glass, her surgical calm fraying. Diana followed her into the hallway where Regina waited with Richmond, who was completing homework between interviews. How bad? Regina asked softly. 4 families. Zora's voice shook. 4 children she helped separate from their mothers, and Richmond would have been number 5. But he wasn't, Regina reminded her, because you raised a son who knows how to recognize patterns, who documents evidence, who understands that real love doesn't require lies. Richmond looked up from his tablet. Is Odette telling the truth? Finally, Zora sat beside him. Your notebook helped the FBI connect all the cases. Those other children, they might get justice because of you. His small face turned serious. Like when you find a tumor pattern that helps you save other patients. Exactly like that, baby. Diana's phone buzzed. Vermont's lawyers are calling. Seems he's ready to deal. Now that his accomplice is confessing, Regina scoffed. Let him sweat. But Zora was watching Richmond, seeing the toll each revelation took. What do you think, baby? Should we hear what your father has to say? Richmond considered this with the same focus he gave complex coding problems. In your surgeries, when you find one problem, do you check for others? Always. We call it comprehensive diagnosis. He nodded. Then we should listen. See what else they were hiding. The truth, when it finally emerged, was uglier than even Zora had imagined. Vermont's company had been built on stolen research, not just from her, but from various scientists whose work Odette had accessed through her network of wealthy marks. The kidnapping scheme was just part of a larger pattern of corporate espionage and international fraud. The SEC investigation revealed offshore accounts, false patents, and a web of deception that stretched across continents. Vermont hadn't just betrayed his family, he'd built his entire empire on lies. As the evidence mounted, more players emerged from the shadows. Other nannies in Odette's network, other CEOs who'd used her services to steal intellectual property along with children. The scandal expanded like a metastasizing cancer, touching tech companies, wealthy families, and corrupt officials across Europe. Richmond documented everything in a new notebook, applying his coding skills to help the FBI track digital patterns. His mother's surgical precision, combined with his father's tech knowledge, but guided by a moral compass that pointed true. You know, he said one evening as they reviewed his latest findings, Dad always said I got my intelligence from him, but he was wrong. Oh, Zora looked up from the complex data pattern he'd identified. I got my brain from you, Mum. You taught me to use it to help people, not hurt them." In that moment, surrounded by evidence of betrayal, but wrapped in the strength of truth, Zora realized they'd won something more valuable than revenge. They'd preserved what mattered most, the bond between mother and son, forged in science and strengthened by adversity. The hidden truths were finally exposed, like tumors brought to light under a surgeon's skilled hands. The real healing could begin. Chapter 10. The Unraveling. The implosion of Amador Tech sent shockwaves through Seattle's tech community. On a rainy Monday morning, federal agents swarmed the company's gleaming headquarters, boxes of evidence streaming out as employees gathered in stunned clusters. Vermont sat in an interrogation room at the FBI office, his Tom Ford suit wrinkled from hours of questioning. Gone was the smooth-talking CEO who'd charmed investors and stolen his wife's research. In his place sat a man watching his empire crumble in real time. "Let's talk about Project Neural." Special Agent Morgan laid out documents bearing Zora's distinctive surgical notes. "Your groundbreaking AI algorithm, the one that secured $300 million in Series C funding. Fascinating how similar it is to your wife's research on neural pathway regeneration." "That's circumstantial," Vermont's new criminal defense attorney interjected. "Many AI projects draw inspiration from neuroscience." "Inspiration?" Agent Morgan raised an eyebrow. "What about these?" She produced emails between Vermont and Odette, dated months before she became their nanny. "You hired her specifically because she had access to research through her network of wealthy families. Each father she helped abduct children for was connected to tech or biotech. Each company she infiltrated mysteriously developed breakthroughs shortly after." Vermont's composed facade cracked. "Those emails are private, like the private servers we found? The ones containing research stolen from labs across Europe?" Another file appeared. "Or perhaps you'd like to discuss the cryptocurrency transfers to accounts linked to known corporate espionage rings." In another room, Zora reviewed the evidence with Diana and a team of federal prosecutors. The scope of Vermont and Odette's scheme was staggering. They hadn't just targeted her research, they'd used Richmond's advanced coding classes as cover to access other parents' work, stealing intellectual property while grooming children for eventual abduction. "The pattern is consistent," Diana noted, spreading photos across the table. "Odette infiltrates wealthy families with valuable intellectual property, seduces the father, manipulates the children, facilitates corporate theft. Then, when investigators get close, they disappear to France with the children, leaving devastated mothers and compromised companies behind." Zora studied the faces of other women like her, brilliant scientists and executives whose children had vanished along with their life's work. "Have they been notified?" "Interpol is coordinating with French authorities. Thanks to Richmond's documentation, we have solid evidence to pursue international charges." Richmond's notebooks, now multiple volumes, had become central to the investigation. His methodical recording of conversations, dates, and patterns had helped authorities connect cases across continents. The FBI had even created a special task force, dubbed Operation Science Fair, after where the scheme first unraveled. "Mom." Richmond appeared at the door with Regina, returning from his latest interview with the cybercrimes unit. "I found something else." He opened his laptop, pulling up a complex data visualization he'd created. "See these patterns?" Dad's company filed patents right after each of Odette's playdates with other tech families. The timestamps match perfectly. The prosecutors leaned in, amazed by the 8-year-old's analytical skills. Richmond had mapped every connection, every stolen innovation, every false patent. His inherited intelligence, once weaponized against Zora, now served justice instead. "The company's stock is worthless," Diana reported, checking her phone. "Every major investor has pulled out. The board is facing criminal charges for knowingly profiting from stolen research." Vermont's personal wealth had evaporated. His mansion was seized, his accounts frozen, his reputation destroyed. But it was the loss of his son's respect that broke him completely. During a supervised visitation, likely his last for years, Richmond had confronted him directly. "Why did you steal Mom's work?" His young voice carried all of Zora's surgical precision. "She would have helped you if you'd asked. She helps everyone." Vermont had no answer. How could he explain to his brilliant ethical son that he'd chosen greed over integrity, that he'd seen his wife's genius as something to exploit rather than admire? The evidence kept mounting. Odette's network unraveled, revealing dozens of compromised companies and traumatized families. Tech journalists dubbed it the Nanny Gate scandal, tracing how one sophisticated operative had facilitated millions in corporate theft while destroying families across continents. Zora watched it all with clinical detachment, like observing the inevitable spread of consequences after a precise surgical cut. She'd removed the cancer from her life. Now the disease was being fully exposed, its every hidden metastasis brought to light. In her hospital office, surrounded by the research Vermont had tried to steal, Zora finally allowed herself to feel something beyond calculated revenge. Pride in Richmond, whose moral compass had never wavered, gratitude for Regina, who'd flown across the country to support them, satisfaction that truth, like a well-wielded scalpel, had cut cleanly through every lie. Dr. Sterling Amador, her assistant, appeared. "The FBI needs to review more of your original research notes," and Richmond's coding teacher called. "He's been accepted into an advanced AI ethics program at MIT. Zora smiled. Let Vermont and Odette face justice for their crimes. She and Richmond had more important work to do, healing others, advancing science, using their gifts to help rather than harm. The unraveling was complete. The truth had won. Chapter 11. Justice served. The United States District Court for the Western District of Washington stood imposing against the gray Seattle sky. News vans clogged the streets as reporters jostled for position, all waiting for the biggest corporate fraud sentencing of the decade. Vermont Amador, tech CEO, corporate thief, failed father, was about to face justice. Inside courtroom 3A, Zora sat in the front row, elegant in a surgeon's navy suit that spoke of precision and power. Richmond sat beside her, his Yale blue tie matching hers, his tablet displaying the complex algorithm he'd created to help prosecutors track the pattern of his father's crimes. "All rise," the Honorable Judge Marcus Thompson presiding. Vermont was led in, wearing orange prison scrubs, a far cry from his beloved Tom Ford suits. 3 weeks in federal detention had stripped away his polished veneer, revealing the hollow man beneath. His eyes sought Richmond, but his son was focused on his tablet, documenting this final chapter of their family's transformation. "Before we proceed with sentencing," Judge Thompson began, "there are additional charges to be considered. The SEC has submitted new evidence of securities fraud spanning 5 countries. Additionally, the French authorities have filed extradition requests related to corporate espionage charges." Vermont's new attorney, no longer the expensive criminal defense team he couldn't afford, shifted nervously. "Your Honor, my client has cooperated fully." "Has he?" The judge's voice could have frosted steel. "Let's review the scope of Mr. Amador's crimes." A court officer began displaying evidence on the massive screens: stolen research, false patents, millions in fraudulent investments. Each slide was annotated with Richmond's precise data analysis, showing how his father had built an empire on theft and lies. The defendant didn't just steal his wife's groundbreaking medical research. The prosecutor rose. He used his own child's coding classes as cover to access other parents' intellectual property. He conspired with Odette Laurent to systematically target vulnerable families, stealing both corporate secrets and children. Zora watched Vermont's shoulders slump as the evidence mounted. Her surgical mind catalogued each sign of his collapse, like monitoring a patient's vital signs during a complicated procedure. In the row behind them, Regina Sterling sat with Diana Zhang, watching justice unfold. They'd just come from another courtroom where Odette had faced her own reckoning. The former nanny had finally broken under the weight of evidence, confessing to decades of corporate espionage and family manipulation. "Mr. Amador," Judge Thompson's voice cut through the courtroom, "would you like to address the court before sentencing?" Vermont stood shakily. "Your Honor, I lost my way. The pressure to succeed in tech, to be seen as a visionary. I convinced myself I was entitled to Zora's brilliance, that her work somehow belonged to me too, just because we were married. And Richmond," the judge pressed, "how do you justify conspiring to kidnap your own son?" "I listened to the wrong person. Odette made me believe. She said having a surgeon for a mother was damaging him, that he needed a real family." Vermont's voice cracked. "But Richmond proved how wrong we were. He used the very skills his mother taught him, precision, documentation, ethical analysis, to expose our crimes." "The skills my mother taught me weren't just about science." Richmond's clear voice rang out as he requested to address the court. "She taught me that real success comes from helping people, not hurting them." Judge Thompson nodded, allowing the young witness who had broken the case wide open to speak. The courtroom fell silent. "My father stole research that could have helped people with brain injuries," Richmond continued, his tablet displaying the complex neural pathways his mother studied. "Every month he delayed these discoveries. Someone somewhere couldn't be healed. That's the real crime." Vermont seemed to physically shrink under his son's words. Gone was the commanding CEO who had once dominated boardrooms. In his place sat a broken man in Prison Orange, watching his legacy crumble through his child's eyes. Furthermore, Judge Thompson consulted his notes, the investigation revealed systematic targeting of female researchers across multiple institutions. Mr. Amador, through his partnership with Ms. Laurent, specifically sought out brilliant women in STEM fields, using their children as leverage to access and steal their work. The prosecutor stood. "The government presents evidence of 12 additional cases, Your Honor. In each instance, the pattern was identical. Ms. Laurent would infiltrate the family. Mr. Amador's company would suddenly announce breakthroughs in that field, and then the children would disappear to France with their fathers, leaving the mothers without access to both their research and their children." Screens around the courtroom displayed photos, empty lab benches where pioneering women had once worked, abandoned children's rooms, tearful mothers at police stations. The human cost of Vermont's greed laid bare. "My client acknowledges the severity," Vermont's lawyer began. "Your client acknowledges nothing," the prosecutor interrupted. "Even after his arrest, we found evidence of attempts to transfer stolen intellectual property to offshore entities. It was his own son's coding expertise that helped us track these transactions." Richmond's data visualization appeared on the screens, a complex web showing how Vermont had tried to hide assets and research even from prison. The 8-year-old's mastery of blockchain analysis had impressed even veteran FBI cyber experts. "Dr. Sterling Amador," Judge Thompson addressed Zora directly. "As the primary victim of both corporate and personal theft, would you like to make a victim impact statement?" Zora rose, her surgeon's posture perfect. "Your Honor, I'm not here as a victim. I'm here as a witness to the resilience of truth the power of ethical science, and the strength of a child raised to value integrity over profit. She turned slightly, ensuring Vermont could see her face. My research will help people heal. That's why I pursued medicine instead of chasing billions. My son understood that at 8 years old, while his father still hasn't grasped it at 45. The research he stole, she continued, we completed it anyway. While he sat in detention, my team finished the neural pathway trials. We're already helping patients recover from traumatic brain injuries. That's real success, not stock prices or fake patents, but actual lives improved. Vermont's facade finally shattered completely. Tears streaked down his face as he realized the full magnitude of what he'd sacrificed. Not just his freedom or fortune, but the chance to be part of something genuinely meaningful. In light of all evidence, Judge Thompson began his sentencing, this court finds the defendant's actions represent an extraordinary breach of trust, personal, professional, and parental. The systematic targeting of female researchers through their children represents a particularly reprehensible pattern of exploitation. The judge paused, reviewing the final damage tally. Vermont Amador, please rise. Vermont stood on shaking legs as Judge Thompson continued. For multiple counts of corporate espionage, wire fraud, securities fraud, conspiracy to commit international parental kidnapping, and intellectual property theft, this court sentences you to 25 years in federal prison. The courtroom erupted in murmurs as the judge continued. Additionally, you are ordered to pay restitution of $847 million to the affected parties. All patents derived from stolen research are hereby revoked. Upon release, you will be barred from holding any corporate leadership position or having contact with minor children, including supervised visits with your son, until he reaches adulthood. Vermont swayed, nearly collapsing. Richmond, please. But Richmond was already turning away, focused on his tablet where he was documenting the final chapter of his family's story. Like his mother, he understood that sometimes healing required complete excision of diseased tissue. In a connected ruling, Judge Thompson added, this court grants Dr. Sterling Amador's petition to restore her maiden name for both herself and her son. Richmond will henceforth legally be Richmond Sterling, removing all connection to the Amador legacy of fraud. Zora placed a hand on Richmond's shoulder as Vermont was led away. Through the courtroom windows, they could see cameras flashing, capturing the moment Seattle's tech king fell from his throne of lies. "Mom," Richmond looked up from his tablet, "can we go to the hospital now? I want to see how the neural pathway patients are doing." Zora smiled, recognizing her own priorities reflected in her son. While reporters clamored for statements about Vermont's sentencing, they would be in the neurology ward, watching real innovation help real people. As they left the courthouse, headlines were already spreading. Tech CEO gets 25 years for systematic theft from female scientists. 8-year-old coding prodigy helps FBI expose father's criminal empire. Justice served. Amador tech fraud scheme ends in historic sentence. But Zora and Richmond didn't need to read them. They had surgeries to observe, coding projects to complete, and lives to heal. They had emerged stronger, their bond forged in the fire of betrayal and tempered by truth. Let Vermont contemplate his crimes in federal prison. Let Odette face justice in multiple countries for her decades of manipulation. The Sterlings had more important work to do. After all, real success wasn't counted in stolen billions or fraudulent patents. It was measured in lives improved, ethical choices made, and truth upheld against all odds. The surgery was complete, the cancer was removed, and the healing could finally, truly begin. Chapter 12. Rising from the Ashes. 1 year later, the Seattle Grace Hospital's neurosurgery wing had never seen such a breakthrough. Zora Sterling stood in operating room 1, her hands steady as they'd always been, while hundreds of doctors watched the live stream of her revolutionary procedure. Her neural pathway treatment wasn't just repairing traumatic brain injuries anymore. It was evolving human consciousness itself. Richmond, now 9, sat in the observation deck above, his tablet displaying the AI-enhanced imaging system he'd coded to help guide his mother's hands. The marriage of his artificial intelligence and her surgical precision had changed medicine forever. "Notice the pathway regeneration," Zora's voice carried through the speakers, calm and confident. "We're not just healing damage, we're building something new, something stronger." The neural imaging screens showed something extraordinary, patterns of connection that had never been seen before in human history. A year of focused research, unencumbered by theft and betrayal, had yielded what some were calling a medical miracle. Suddenly, Richmond's tablet screen flickered. At first, he thought it was just interference from the medical equipment. But then patterns emerged, patterns he recognized all too well. Someone was hacking the hospital's security system. Someone good. Someone who knew exactly how his coding architecture worked. His fingers flew across the screen, tracing the intrusion. The signature was familiar. He'd seen it before, in his father's stolen algorithms. But this was different, more sophisticated, more dangerous. The surgical imaging screens flickered next. For just a moment, beneath the neural pathway display, another image appeared. A French passport photo. Not one, but 4. Thomas, Sophie, Marcus, Maya. The missing children from Odette's previous lives. But these weren't the old photos from the investigation. These were new. The children were older, their eyes empty, their smiles practiced. Each wore a small pin with a distinctive symbol, one Richmond had seen before. In the encrypted files he'd helped the FBI decode, the mark of a shadow organization that specialized in reshaping young minds. An alert popped up on his tablet. Unauthorized access. Neural imaging system. Location, multiple points. Origin, encrypted. Then another. Did you think prison walls could hold someone who reshapes children's minds for a living, mon petit? Your mother taught me so much about neural pathways, about how to redirect them. The other children learned too. Soon they'll help me teach others, starting with you. Richmond's hand shot up, trying to warn his mother. But the observation deck's communications were already down. In the operating room below, Zora remained focused on her groundbreaking procedure, unaware that her imaging system was now showing something very different to the hundreds of watching doctors. Something that would question every miracle she'd achieved this past year. Richmond's tablet displayed one final message. You mapped my patterns so beautifully, little scientist. But did you ever wonder why I let you? Some tumors want to be found, some cancers need witnesses, and some revenge plots take years to metastasize. Ask your mother about case file 2019-847, the first child whose neural pathways she redirected. The lights in the hospital flickered once, twice. When they stabilized, every screen in the building displayed the same image. A younger Zora, standing over a child's operating table. The date stamp was clear, 2019, before Vermont, before Odette, and beneath it, in Odette's elegant handwriting, did you really think you were the first scientist mother I'd encountered, ma chérie? The first to sacrifice one child's mind to save many? Richmond deserves to know what happened to your first test subject, your first son. The neural imaging system crashed completely, and somewhere in the hospital's pristine halls, a French lullaby began to play. I'm heartbroken for the people of Los Angeles, watching as they endure such unimaginable pain and loss. Tears fill my eyes as I think of those who have lost everything, homes, memories, and the security they once knew. My soul aches for the families, the children and the communities left in the aftermath of such devastation. I pray with all my heart that they find comfort in each other, strength in their faith, and hope for a brighter tomorrow. Lord, wrap them in your love and guide them through this darkness. Amen. May their hearts find peace, and may they feel the warmth of support and love from all around them.